Hey, welcome everyone to this edition of the 5G-aliser. With us today, we have Dean Bubley from Disruptive Analysis and who also writes some research for STL.
Hi there, Amy. Thanks.
Hey, Dean. We've got Harry Baldock, who is editor at Total Telecom.
Hi, everyone.
We've got Andrew Collinson, who's research director at STL Partners.
Hi.
And you've got me. I'm a principal analyst at STL Partners. So we've been working on this thing called the 5G-aliser, which hopefully you can see from the graphic on this page is a very cool thing that helps us think about all the different things that are impacting the development of 5G. So we've got 20 factors. Some of them are primary, so those are the ones that we think are most important. Some of them are secondary factors, and those are a little bit less important, but still have an impact on the development of the market. And some of them are wild cards. So those can come and go, and also they can have a big impact kind of out of nowhere. And so this is what we've been doing for, I don't know, about 18 months. And this is the quarterly update in video format. So talking on the wild cards, one of those has popped up since our last edition of the 5G-aliser in November, and that is geopolitics. So I don't know, Andrew, Dean, this is usually the kind of topic you guys are pretty hot on. What's your take on the impact of the current world situation on the telecoms industry and maybe 5G particularly?
Well, I'll start by saying it's kind of a theme that we expected to see, an increasing divergence of geopolitical aspirations. But I'm not sure that, not being in the field of military intelligence, that I expected to see the developments we've recently seen in Europe, for example. So clearly things have taken a different foot. Things have happened. The world has happened. So expected, yes, trend, no specific. In terms of the impact of it, I think Dean's probably in a better position to comment. I mean, we were talking about it yesterday. Dean, what were you thinking? You were thinking.
There's a couple of things. There's the immediate tactical impact of what's going on in Ukraine, and there's actually, I was just listening to a really good piece in The Economist about communications in a war zone and how there's been less interruption for Ukrainians than you might have expected, and that's partly down to heroic actions by engineers. But I think that there's also a bunch of other things that come out of this. First off, one of the implications is that we've been talking about in the West, with the removal of Chinese vendors, having potentially a duopoly, which has been one of the things which has catalyzed the interest in Open RAN. Right, we can debate the ins and outs, but that's certainly been the sort of overriding theme. Well, Russia is now going to also be facing a duopoly of Huawei and ZTE, given the sanctions on Western gear. So it'd be interesting to see what that means. There's also a couple of other things that have cropped up in terms of technology diversity. One is the role of satellite communications has become more important as a backup to terrestrial mobile options. And you saw Elon Musk donating a set of Starlink terminals to Ukraine. The other side to it is I've seen some reports about problems caused by GPS jamming, and GPS is required for cellular networks for the timing synchronization. And what to me this says is that I think the world is not just going to need to look at vendor diversity in future, but also in terms of technology and network diversity, because whether it's through bad actors, whether it's through jamming, whether it's through bugs, through hacking, anything else, relying on any one technology is another threat surface. So I suspect there's going to be a geopolitical push towards using multiple, quite possibly separate networks rather than integrated networks, certainly for critical infrastructure in future.
I think it's quite fascinating, really, how this kind of discussion that we were having probably in the last 2 or 3 years, really, about digital sovereignty and having these kind of this lack of reliance on other countries for your own supply chains, whether that's in something like satellite or semiconductors, and of course we had a big semiconductor supply crisis in the last few years as well. I think what's going on in geopolitics now is really going to kind of shift that conversation. And as Dean says, there's an element of you kind of think that you almost need more globalization, right, to expand these supply chains and make a more diverse ecosystem. But at the same time, the politics as it is may not allow for that. So I think that's going to be a really interesting kind of clash going forward.
It's more likely, I think, you're going to have blocks in a way, in that, you know, that very few countries are going to be able to completely be self-sufficient. And you're going to have alliances and either the regional or global types of blocks emerging.
One of the issues is that the one regional bloc that already exists is CEPT, the European Telecom Regulatory Organization. And I think I was reading something, I don't know if Russia's been kicked out, suspended or something like that, but that's going to have a whole set of implications about, for example, discussions within ITU about spectrum at the next World Radio Congress. And also I seem to remember that there's some debate about, I can't remember if it was ITU or another industry body, about what this means in terms of upcoming, I can't remember if it's leadership or deputy leadership elections or something like that. So there's a set of the telecoms industry's own political and grouping infrastructure at a transnational level, which also this puts some interesting new lenses on.
So I want to, because we want to keep this quick, sort of take us on to the next topic of discussion. It is somewhat related in the sense that we're talking about, you know, how do you mix and match with different technologies and what is involved if you're creating a lot of different redundancies, and how the telecoms industry is grappling with this. And it is, you know, I think feeds into this idea, which is really everywhere, is moving from becoming a telco to a techco. And it is everywhere. And I feel like my main challenge with this is understanding, like, what do we actually mean by techco? What does a techco that used to be a telco look like? Is it, because, you know, we were chatting about it yesterday, and for me, I think I probably think of a company like Rakuten, but they're super greenfield, and the stuff that they're presenting around Rakuten Symphony is like a million miles away for me, what a legacy telecoms operator looks like. But maybe if we break it down into different layers or different areas, there's sort of like you know, we're seeing transitions in different parts of the telecoms operator that is, you know, moving in that direction and making this sort of topic area a little bit more concrete today than it was like 2 years ago or 18 months ago when we launched the 5G-aliser. I think
it means something different than it used to, for a start. So in telco, you know, in telco world mind, as it were. And I think the fundamental difference here is that they're talking about operating like a techco, not necessarily being one yet, because they've tried that before and it failed. And the reason it failed is they lack, you know, the geographical reach and the hyperscale economics to be an internet player type operation. I think what most of them mean by techco now is operate like a techco. So using agile methods, virtualization and so forth, more like a software company. That's what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. I think that's what this trend means, but I agree with you that it's broken out. I can see Dean making faces. So how would you change that statement, Dean?
I think it varies a lot, and there's different levels of technology which operators are interested in, and some are doing more than others in each. And going from the bottom, you've got some, like we mentioned, Rakuten, that goes right down in the weeds to understanding even the semiconductors that go into radio networks. You've got whether it's Open RAN or other radio technologies, and to some extent, you could also say with Cable Labs, some of the stuff they do on DOCSIS or on Wi-Fi. So the network, you've got a number of operators that are looking more at either understanding, owning, or being able to program the virtualization environment. Obviously the evolution of NFV towards cloud native. And there's been a bit of to and fro. Some have been ramping up. Then you also saw AT&T divest some of its activities there to Microsoft Azure a while back. And then there's the top layer, which is where telecoms companies are looking more at technology solutions for whether it's particular verticals, whether it's acquiring solutions for, could be advertising, as well as in some cases making VC investments in everything from application services to real nuts and bolts stuff that's going into Open RAN and radio infrastructure. And you've got some operators that have long had decent size R&D functions. AT&T long ago spun off Bell Labs, but you've got Docomo, BT with Martlesham, SKT in Korea that's doing, quantum-based security solutions, and others doing that as well. So you've got this, deeper involvement in technology. And I think some of that comes from a recognition that the telcos had a real category error about their rivals. They've been categorizing Facebook and Google/Alphabet and Apple as sort of web companies, whereas in fact they go all the way down to the silicon and all the way up to satellite and have fiber networks and the rest of it. So they are true tech companies. And I think that telcos are suddenly playing catch up, and they realise that that they don't have the expertise, whether it's on fiber, whether it's on AI, whether it's on virtualization and clusters and all this stuff. And I think they're trying to catch up.
I really think that, Dean, the examples that you bring up between like SK Telecom and AT&T are like good comparisons, because when I think TechCo, it's like if you take an SKT, yeah, they are doing some really cool stuff in quantum security. They've got a chipset company in SK Hynix. They've got e-commerce. They've got mapping. So they've got, Google, like essentially the Google map of South Korea. So they have a lot of tech expertise. But I'm not sure that when we're thinking about it from a telco cloud perspective, that they are necessarily at the forefront of sort of techifying connectivity, which is really what AT&T is trying to do, and the whole working with Microsoft, or what Rakuten is trying to do in some parts of the stack. And so I think that it's like, if you are a conglomerate like SKT and you have knowledge across a number of different technology industries, is that going to make you more successful in connectivity, and does it matter? Like, I don't know exactly what the answer is to that, but I think it does matter to a degree. Certainly when we're thinking from our research from a telco cloud perspective, is that if you can't, as Andrew says, like operate differently in your core business that brings out in the vast majority of revenues, then you're not really getting that hyperscale economics benefit.
Rakuten's the outlier here because that was actually a techco that built up a telco. Rakuten's been doing cloud forever. In fact, they bought Viber long before they got into running their own mobile networks.
Hey, Harry, I feel like you're going to jump in.
I don't know. I think one of the things that I think about is that all of these telcos that you guys are talking about, like SKT and AT&T, they've all got scale. And so, whether or not it's maybe going to be effective or not to do this, they have the resources to at least try and shift their focus in some way, regardless of kind of how deep they want to go. And I wonder where it leaves smaller telcos, so maybe some in like developing countries and things like that don't have these resources to make that transition, and whether that means that some of these places are going to have a tough time kind of relying on the traditional telco model, like kind of once it's already obsolete, I guess.
I think though that you can look at, we're talking to some extent about outliers in, when you talk about Rakuten, and because of its extreme difference in its nature, and AT&T because it's massive. But you take someone like Elisa, we've looked at a lot, they have been very innovative, and there are areas in which they're extremely successful, and Finland is not a big country, so it is possible, but it takes vision and commitment. But I'd go back to, I was thinking that as an old friend of mine had two uncles, Uncle Jim and Uncle John, and every Christmas they would argue drunkenly, and they would conclude the argument by saying, "You are right, but I am correct." And I think that's kind of where I feel about me and Dean on this, in that I think what I was describing is what I feel is the center of gravity for operators. They're trying to become more IT operated. I think what Dean did was a very good description of the range of difference of what that actually means. But I think a lot of them, as you say, are really struggling with it. And many of the smaller scale folk will be struggling to innovate on the back of sort of pretty not standard exactly, but systems provided by main vendors, because they're not going to be able to go completely open in all their software. They're not going to have all the software expertise in-house. Now, it doesn't mean they can't do good things and be innovative, because actually it's about what you do with that stuff and how you apply it. a lot of what my feeling about the techco versus telco debate is it's not really the answer. It's a step towards the answer. Being a techco is a useful idea. It helps people change. It moves you forward in how you think about your job. So it might help a few people go, you know what, I think I could change what I'm doing to something different. But unless you're actually embracing a different challenge in the marketplace and you're saying, well, we'll try and solve some different problems, and Avio's SDL is you've got a whole range of different problems to solve which are around resource effectiveness, and all of your customers are struggling with this, and until you start thinking about how you address that, then you're essentially just doing what you were doing but doing it a bit better, which is fine and maybe the right strategy for some. But I think this whole techco telco thing is a sort of a half step in a way.
So let me ask you what I think is one of the next steps that's more fundamental. And I think we're going to have to wrap up on this because we're running out of time. But can telcos really evolve without changing their business models, right? The way that they sell things. And, I'm thinking moving to an as a service, pay as you go, on demand, with enterprises. And I think that we're seeing this already in the wholesale market, PCCW, Console Connect, and with Colt. And, this is, it's already a much lower margin, more competitive market there. My feeling is that this is coming to sort of the retail enterprise within national markets. And when that business model changes to a sort of cloud commercial models, then we're going to really see this, fundamentally change. And maybe you guys agree or disagree with me on that one.
I think I agree. I mean, but I think change can be seen in different perspectives. So I think when you talk about the business model, there, you're talking about what's being sold, and you see a business model as part of your value network, part of your market proposition, how it's financed, and so on. And I agree with you. To make the real change, it needs to be a holistic one. I think most of the people talking about changing to be, say, a techco, or at least the ones I've seen have been CTOs, and they're talking about changing the way they work within technology and within IT. And I think what you're seeing, what you're talking about, is another related change, which is more holistic. It's about changing the whole business model. So I fundamentally agreeing with you, but I think they're parts of the same whole. They're parts of a move in a direction. Now, whether they're really joined up or they're really successful, discuss and debate. And I'd go back to what I said, which is I don't really see how you can do it successfully without understanding the end you have in mind. You're adapting and not really moving.
I'd just add that actually the other thing is that this is happening at the same time as the number of different types of telco are changing. And so I think that the opportunities for sort of generic identikit telcos that are just sort of reselling vanilla mobile access or fixed line are going to start disappearing. And actually what you'll find is new telcos who are native cloudcos, tower companies, municipal operators, industrial operators, fixed wireless operators, all of these sort of new species of telcos. And you'll see more M&A between those and the sort of legacy operators. And I think we end up with a much more diverse universe of service providers and network owners. And so I think this term telco, whether they go to become more technology oriented or more solution oriented, it sort of doesn't matter. You're going from this sort of 800 semi-identical, apart from scale operators, to 100 different types of service provider.
Any parting words, Harry? You're on mute.
I'm not really sure I can close better than that. I think the fact that the ecosystem is going to change so quickly, I think all of the operators kind of agree that this is a necessity and it is going to happen one way or another. To what extent and how quickly remains to be seen. But if they don't do it, someone else will, and that's what we've been seeing for quite a long time, I think.
Great. Well, I think let's bring this edition to the 5G-aliser to a close then. As you'll notice, we've had this whole discussion without mentioning 5G. And what that makes me think is really, way back to one of the first, or well, not in the first, but an early report Dean wrote for STL Partners on 5G, which was really that 5G is first and foremost going to change the telecoms industry more than any other. And I think that, what we've been talking about today is the nature of that change. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you.